Welcome to the Maintainable Software Podcast, where we explore the art of improving existing software with seasoned practitioners who have helped organizations overcome the problems often associated with technical debt and legacy code. I'm your host, Robby Russell. On this episode, Kate Holterhoff, PhD, who is currently a Senior Analyst at RedMonk. Kate joins us from Atlanta, Georgia, in the United States. Kate Holterhoff, we're so glad to have you join us on Maintainable. Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So as you reflect on your experience in the industry, what do you believe are a few common characteristics of, dare I say, well-maintained software?
Well, let me start by saying that my experience as a practitioner was as a front-end engineer at a digital marketing agency. And so I feel like my perspective is maybe a little bit distinct from a lot of other folks. I live in Atlanta, and there's a lot of many of my acquaintances work at like SaaS organizations. And so the sort of projects that I interacted with when I was a front-end engineer tended to have gone through several hands first. And they, and so they bore the marks of all the developers who had touched them before. And that made maintenance especially, top of mind, but also I didn't see a lot of very well maintained software. So I'll just begin with that caveat. But I would say in my own experience and on the interactive team that I was a part of, we really emphasized, keeping things modular. And so we would use, some best practices in terms of like BEM and making sure that we're using, syntax and different, styles that really ensure that we were, that the folks who came after us, whether they are at our own organization, so, other engineers, or the possible other development teams who we might hand this off to in the future, then everyone would be able to read this. And then, we also wanted to make sure that things were semantically readable by other folks. So I think with JavaScript especially, which was, the language that I wrote the most of, there's ways to be very cute in the way that you author JavaScript. And so I'm a self-taught developer. And so when I was learning JavaScript, I did all these code katas, and you got, bonus points for keeping it quick. And I would always fail those because I would write these sort of long answers, right? These sort of extended for loops. And there was always a way to, use, to write it very quickly with just a few characters. And I would always fail them. But after speaking with folks higher up into the org, I learned that actually the way that I was doing it was better because, folks could actually read it. It wasn't just a bunch of gobbledygook. It was actually, it was meant to be part of the organizational memory. It was meant to be passed on and read by others, not just, have the sort of quickest, the least amount of characters used up.
It's interesting. You're touching on the point around working in a digital marketing agency environment, and I run a software consultancy, and so I work closely with the marketing agencies. But we've also we've not been a marketing agency, but we've used to do a lot more design focused projects where it was a kind of a trying to ship something by a specific campaign or something. So there's a lot of other pressures to make sure that we can get something done and launched by a certain time, whether it's some new features or maybe helping one of our clients with a redesign or something. And there's technical things that have to, like maybe new functionality that we're shipping as part of that campaign. And there's a lot of trade-offs that happen there. And so was your experience in those environments tending to be more of like, hey, we're building something new for this type of campaign, or were usually like redesigns, or were you often having to be the ones that maintain it 6 to 12 months later? Or was it more like help get the thing out the door and then on to the next project type of scenario for you as an individual contributor level person?
Yeah, well, it certainly depended, but I would say a lot of the projects that I would work on just on a day-to-day, I mean, the sort of tickets that I would receive in the morning would be, hey, go back into this project that nobody has touched in 12 months. And, they want to change the banner, or they want a new landing page or whatever. So those would be the sort of changes that we would make. And, I spent a lot of time working with the CMSs of these different organizations. I wouldn't say that we were quite a WordPress shop. I mean, we had a variety of different CMS that we would, work with. So Drupal, Magento, so I've seen a few things. And also we had created our own, which was a Ruby on Rails sort of in-house CMS. So in any event, it wouldn't just be a matter of like replacing the images or the text. I mean, generally their marketing folks would take care of that. But I did spend a lot of time with page builders. And so I would say that, it could even be as easy as like, going in and rearranging through WP Bakery or something, the way that they're, that they have things sort of organized. But yeah, we did a fair bit of going back into projects that we had been maintaining for even years and looking at them. And so actually some of the projects that I was involved in had to do with like recreating the site writ large, right? So they had sort of an old site that had been around for 10 years and they were thinking through, maybe we should replatform this. And so the back end folks would generally take care of, getting it all set up, and then the front end folks would step in. And depending on how involved they were, we would also wireframe it and have the designers take over from there. And I think that was what I really enjoyed about that whole process, was that collaboration with different aspects. And so as the front end engineer, I was the one who sort of received the PSD file at the end and was able to talk to the designers about like, well, how should these buttons look, and what is the sort of interactive quality of those, and Adobe had some features that allowed that to be sort of embedded in, which was nice. But there was always we always had to talk to one another about what that would actually look like when it was finished. So yeah, so it did run the gamut, but yeah, there was a lot of maintenance involved, and we would go back in and look at it. And I would say, I hadn't always looked at them. A lot of times I'd have to talk to the other developers on the team and said, hey, who's worked on this particular project? Or we go through the repository and say, okay, I'm going to look at all the commits here and see who the last front-end engineer was who committed to this project. And they're it. I'm going to ask them all my questions.
Have you ever had to reach out to someone that no longer work there anymore and be like, hey, I know you worked on this thing 5 years ago, but...
No, I didn't, thankfully. I'm not sure that they would have responded, but I will say organizational memory was very important at my organization. And so I would say that, they weren't always on. But one of the big initiatives that I was involved in while we were there was creating a more robust documentation strategy. And since I come from a background in academia, I spent a lot of time teaching technical writing, for instance, at Georgia Tech. So I could bring that corpus of knowledge to my work as a practitioner. And so one of the things that I was deeply involved in was, insisting on having, we called it a documentation palooza. Maybe we left out the dictation part, but anyways, it involved pizza. It involved everyone clearing their calendars. We all got in a room together and divvied up all the different, accounts that we had been looking at, and just tried to collect all of our memory there so that we wouldn't have that issue of like folks leaving and us being in the lurch. Yeah, pretty sure it did happen from time to time. Or, I definitely had the experience of like looking at a project with my boss and being like, hey, we have some questions here. And they're like, oh, yeah, that person's not here anymore. And we would usually we could figure it out. I think maybe one of the strengths of being at a digital marketing agency like that was, learning how to piece things together through context clues, because the documentation, it wasn't terrible. I mean, we had, the README would have a lot of the information that we needed to, get it up and running, but it didn't always have some of the there be dragons situations, right? That's what creating better documentation for in-house projects really did. So yeah, I don't know how organizations who just have contractors function, because if they're getting paid for getting a project accomplished and not for writing the documentation around it, that you're really going to be in trouble trying to suss out later, what all happened with that project.
Hey folks, it's me, Robby. I want you to take a moment and close your eyes. Now picture your code and your applications as a symphony. Now to keep that symphony playing smoothly, you need an orchestra of tools. That's where our podcast sponsor, AppSignal, takes center stage. They combine the elegance of error tracking, the precision of performance monitoring, and the harmony of logging into one symphonic suite. Whether you're composing with Ruby, jamming with Elixir, orchestrating with Node.js, or harmonizing with Python, or maybe even a little bit of flourish of JavaScript, AppSignal's got the sheet music for you. And here's the crescendo. Plans start at just $23 US a month. That's gotta be music to your budget's ears. Plus they're certified ISO 27001 and they dance the GDPR and HIPAA compliance beats. So don't miss a beat, my friends. Head on over to appsignal.com and tell them that your good friend Robby from Maintainable sent you. Now, open your eyes and let the symphony of smooth coding begin. Let's get back to our show. I want to come back to documentation in a little bit, but one of the things I wanted to talk with you about was, and provide some context for our listeners is, for those listening who might be unfamiliar with the role, could you tell us a little bit about what your role is as you're now a senior analyst? What is that role? Because I don't know that everybody, even myself, I don't want to make any assumptions that I understand what that means.
Sure, sure. Well, and RedMonk is kind of a unique organization in general. So I'm a senior analyst at RedMonk. We're a developer focused analyst firm, and we've been around for about 21 years now, which the co founders love for me to bring up. We're a small organization, there's 5 analysts on the team. And what it means is that we really focus on how developers are actually involved in the decision making that goes on in organizations. And so some other analyst firms would be like, IDC or Gartner or Forrester, and they tend to be very large, and they take more of a sort of buy side perspective, meaning that they're more interested in what it is that, that customers are purchasing. And what we do at RedMonk is we say, how is it that developers are actually functioning in the org? So we spend a lot of time thinking about developer experience. We are very interested in open source. And, we really listen to, what it is that practitioners do on a day-to-day basis. And so as part of that, all of us were practitioners in some capacity. My background was as a front-end engineer. And before that, I was an academic for 10 years and eased my way into academia by way of a discipline called the digital humanities, which was how I sort of got my feet wet in terms of learning a little bit of programming and better understanding some of, I would say, the philosophical aspects behind creating apps. So, for instance, I ran an archive called Visual Haggard, and it kind of came out of my interest in online spaces as being a sort of commons. But at the end of the day, it was a Ruby on Rails app, and it really introduced me a lot to generating metadata. And it was hosted on Heroku, which the free tier. So sadly, it is no longer live. Although you can go on the Wayback Machine and sort of get a glimpse of it. So maybe someday I'll relaunch the project. But in any event, that's sort of my trajectory into working as an analyst. And the day-to-day involves a lot of like attending briefings and talking to either developers or some vendors about what their products are and how it is that they're improving the lives of developers and what that all looks like.
Talking a little bit, I was looking over the RedMonk's blog, and you've written a number of articles, as your colleagues also do. And in one of them, you mentioned how front-end developers are increasingly becoming, and I'm air quoting, kingmakers in the tech industry, and influencing the adoption of tools and technologies in particular. So what would you say are some of the key factors that have led to this shift? And how do you see that evolving in the next few years?
Yeah. So as a practitioner, I kept having this experience of folks almost making me feel bad for choosing front end. And I had a background in design. I, of course, enjoyed, thinking through the communication aspects of software development, like how it was that I was, generating these sort of experiences for the end user. And to me, I thought it was super exciting. And I kept having these conversations with folks saying, oh, yeah, well, front end engineers don't get paid as much. Oh, well, what they do is just, window dressing. It doesn't actually matter. And then, I said, that just doesn't sit right with the experience that I had or what I was sort of hearing. And then the big sort of breakthrough moment for me was that I was listening to a podcast. I'm a big podcast person. And Paul Copplestone from Supabase, he actually said explicitly, I am marketing to Jamstack engineers. And I said, oh my God, this is really worth noting, because instead of it being the ops and backend engineers that vendors are targeting and that are sort of considered the important decision makers in the org, it's the front end engineers who are increasingly making these decisions. And so I, spent, a good amount of time talking to folks and sort of listening in on conversations on Hacker News and things. And it started to become more and more apparent to me that there was this move to market these dev tools and sort of platforms to front-end engineers rather than the sort of traditional persona of, back-end and IT ops. And, and so if we think now of like Vercel marketing itself as the front-end cloud, I mean, to me, that really puts a stamp on it, because when it comes to all the sort of, platform heirs to Heroku sort of, dev tools, they take up most of the oxygen in the room, in my experience, at least. When I go to conferences, they seem to be the ones that are cited the most often. And so, it seemed more and more apparent to me that not only should vendors be paying attention to what front-end engineers are doing, but also, we talk so much about developer experience. Well, not all developers are the same, right? So it seemed also important to say, hey, who are these front end engineers? And so this was a 3-part series. The middle one was on full stack, because another thing that sort of frustrated me was that a lot of vendors were sort of condensing. They still were sort of treating front end as though it was a dirty word and saying, oh no, we're going to market to full stack engineers. And again, it's like, no, nobody, for one, if you look at folks like Lori Voss, I mean, they'll say very clearly, like, full stack is a lie. Like, I don't know if he says that explicitly, but that full stack engineers are asked to do too much. And it really is just the full stack engineers that I know tended to say that they were because they got paid more. And that's a great reason to do it. Hey, I'm not going to take that away from you. But it comes to the sort of day-to-day labor, we're still going to be writing JavaScript. I mean, that is front-end engineering. They still want to be involved in a lot of these sort of exciting front-end client-side conversations about like accessibility, user experience. And now we have this whole new set of tools that allows front-end engineers to do design work, and conversely allows designers to do front-end work. So then the final part of this series actually talks about how the term front-end is really not sufficient for what we're seeing in terms of the future and the trends that are going to be sort of powering development in the future. And I'm not the sort of doom and gloom AI is going to take our jobs sort of person, but what I have noticed is that the abstractions are becoming better. They're becoming more desirable, and they signal, I think, a philosophical change in the industry, which has a lot to do with the move away from treating code as though it's precious. And I think that treating code as though it's a little bit more ephemeral, and that you can sort of drop out parts and replace it with new things, that is going to be essential. And I think what AI and some of these like abstracted solutions allow us to do is to move more quickly and to get past these sort of turgid development processes. I'm not just talking about waterfall here, but anytime I would talk to a backend engineer who had spent months on a feature that nobody ever saw, and that was then, dropped by the product manager before it ever, was actually launched. I mean, not only is that, I think contribute to problems of burnout among developers, but it's just as foolish. I mean, it's not a great way of running an organization. So I think, being able to iterate is what these abstractions permit, and being able to use Netlify or Fly or one of these platforms in order to launch your app quickly and be able to see it immediately and have a working URL. I mean, that's essential. And I haven't even talked about the part of learning here. I'm talking more about like mid and senior level engineers and how they're using these tools. But yeah, I mean, they also become an extremely important tool for education. I mean, that's how I learned to program, was being able to, use Heroku, which was back when I was coming up. That was the thing. I'm thinking of like Michael Hartle's book on Ruby on Rails. He recommended using Heroku. But it's an extremely powerful tool for learning these technologies, as well as to be able to iterate quickly and say, hey, this is hard work, but as I hone my craft, I want to be able to iterate quickly. Also goes for, folks who are entrepreneurs, right? We want to be able to build our landing page quickly. And then, as we scale, we'll go back and sort of think through ways that we could maybe use more primitives rather than these abstracted solutions.
I'm curious about, talking about abstractions in particular, and, having been part of the industry for more than a few decades now, this reminds me of how when I first started, where a lot of the, say, it seemed like I wouldn't say not necessarily gatekeeping, but a lot of decisions were made around server infrastructure, database, which database platform you're going to be using, and things would kind of evolve around. Like, we'd have a lot of business logic in our platform, in the software projects that we'd work on, that would be in the database. We would do things like store procedures, and we'd have a lot of complex rules in the database because you can be codified there. And then we were basically just building backend code. We were kind of like the front end of the database, and so in some ways, at some point, it felt like we were able to get away from that paradigm. Like, hey, we don't need to have like a full-time or multiple full-time DBAs to control everything and tell us where we're going to store data in which columns. We can do this ourselves. And then we did that for a long time. And then now it looks like, okay, front-end developers are kind of doing the same sort of thing. Like, hey, we can just use this back-end API to store data, and I can just do whatever I want with this, and we don't need the back-end. We don't need to wait for the back-end developers to do this stuff. We can do this ourselves. It seems like this interesting kind of, and then you're also just that designers are able to design things and be like, and have that generate some code, and we don't need the front-end developers to wait on them anymore. And it's like, at what point is the client going to be able to just say, like, I don't need the designers anymore?
I mean, according to a lot of the big cloud providers, the future is now, right? We can just use natural language to type in what sort of web app we would like and then move from there. Frankly, I've sat in on, so I've made fun of the slap a chatbot on it approach to AI, because I think that was the sort of first wave of how a lot of vendors and, were integrating AI into their products. Fine. Here, instead of like reading the documentation, we can, use the chatbot to find it. Okay. No big deal. That's, RAG, whatever. But now I am seeing more interesting integrations of these, I guess, AI is being used in a more functional way. And I mean that in the sense of it is actually operating in order to improve how, the tool actually works. And so a few examples of that. I was at the conference Render ATL, which is local here, and I sat in on Lee Robinson's. He did a demo of like a little cute tool that used natural language to generate blocks of code. I think it was like ZO or something. But yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. And then I also spoke to a company called Growthbook, and they were using AI in a similar way. Let me remember what that was. But yeah, it was another. Oh, it was to create A/B tests. So and to me, that seems like, whoa, that is actually going to be a more, useful way of using AI. It's not just a chatbot to kind of regurgitate, hopefully without hallucinations, things that, folks already know. It's actually going to do a task that was previously a manual task that an actual engineer had to do. But, the sort of final bit of evidence is just the number of developers I talk to who are using AI code assistants as part of their just normal workflow. It is remarkable to me. And I'm not just talking about folks having, GitHub Copilot as part of their IDE. They're actually, a lot of them who don't even go that far, don't consider themselves to be, to need tools like that. All of them seem to have, ChatGPT up in the browser, or pay for a subscription with the desktop app. That's what I have. They use it for sort of architectural planning. They use it in order to think through big problems. They use it to learn languages, right? So education and these AI code assistants has been extremely interesting to me, how that works. Because, if you go on to sort of developer watering holes like Reddit, everyone says, oh no, don't learn from, from Copilot. It's going to tell you all the wrong answers. And then there's all these examples of where that's happened. But the truth of the matter is, junior developers, folks who are trying to rescale into the industry, they are using these tools and they're going to keep using them. And frankly, I don't think that we should try to stop them. We should certainly make them aware that, the first answer you get is probably not right. You're going to want to verify. And also, you're not going to improve your skills very much if you're just relying on these tools. But at the same time, even senior developers are using them to learn new coding languages, like, for instance, Rust. That's the new hotness, right? Everybody wants to build their new little hobby project in Rust. So, but, there's a bit of a learning curve. So those are the sort of stories that I'm hearing. And yeah, I think it's really an exciting time for following those conversations and seeing how it's going to shift the industry, and sort of trying to have a crystal ball to guess what's going to happen in the next 5-10 years to the industry. But I think, we're always going to find reasons to have the operator in control. The developer is going to be there making these decisions, but maybe the definition of developer is going to increase quite a bit, so that we have folks who want to start a company using these tools in order to create their tests or create the code blocks that they need. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's great, because, a lot of it comes down to scaling at the end of the day, right? If you're relying too much on an abstraction or, an AI code assistant, it's not going to scale at the rate that you need. You're going to need someone who actually knows what they're doing to make some of these decisions.
We'll be right back with our interview with Kate in a moment. Hi, it's me, Robby. Just wanted to say thank you for listening to the podcast. If you're finding these conversations valuable, please consider sharing a link amongst your peers and writing a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever else you can do that to help spread the word. If you're not sure what you should write, to say, hey, I really enjoyed that conversation with Kate, or maybe you can recommend one of your favorite episodes to start in your review. Give us 1 star, 2 star, 5 stars. I'll leave that to you. Also, is there someone you think I should interview on the podcast at some point? Shoot me an email to robby@maintainable.fm. And now, let's get back to our interview with Kate Holterhoff. We mentioned thinking around junior developers in learning and using these tools, and you also mentioned like we got to verify things, but how do you? And I can see how people might maybe. I'm trying not necessarily trying to defend those on Reddit, but I would imagine if you're a junior developer and not knowing how to verify something, if you're kind of like, well, who are you trusting? You know, and you can, and the same could honestly be said of any senior mentor that's working with you or you're pairing with you as well. Like what they say may not actually be everything's probably on some sort of spectrum of how. Yeah, it's not everything's like that's the right way to do it or not. It's like, does this work or not? And there's probably different levels of like how efficient. There's other ways to get away from that subjective thing and be like, does it work? But how well is this going to be maintained as a piece of code? You know, if AI is generating some code, how easy is it to take care of it, maintain it, understand it, read it, all those other things that developers need to be able to do in the future to to continue evolving those projects. How do you think AI code assistants can help junior developers? Like, what's your thought pattern there around like, no, you should embrace it, but maybe like if anyone's listening and they're kind of like, well, I would be hesitant to encourage one of my junior developers on our team to use these tools too much. Like, where's that boundary for you?
I mean, I think I'd answer it in two different ways. So one is that these tools, it's going to be important to know how to use them.
Like from a prompt basis or something like.
Yeah, like there's always a learning curve to any developer tool, right? And so I think if we're putting junior developers who are fresh out of a boot camp or their CS degree and they've never used one before, they're going to be at a disadvantage. Maybe not today, but in the future. So they should learn how to use them early on. Learn sort of how, how to get the settings the right way, how to sort of interact with them, because, the code completion can be off-putting for some folks. I definitely have talked to some more senior developers who say, oh yeah, I can type more quickly than Copilot can generate the code that I need, or that it's generating the wrong kind of code. And so they'll turn that off. Okay, fine. But learning what those settings are and how to talk about them and like how they work, I think is going to be essential. So that's the sort of first reason that I think junior developers should be introduced to them. And I would say like an ancillary to that, ChatGPT is sort of the new Stack Overflow, in the sense that folks, you can go there and copy and paste code and you get, pretty good answers, much like Stack Overflow, and then drag that over to your actual code base, right? But the integrated IDEs, that those are the ones that are, I think, important to learn how they work, what they look like, and whether or not they would help. And so, and then the second thing that I would say to that is that, yeah, absolutely, you want to be skeptical of these tools, and I think anyone who's going into them without, a healthy reserve is going to be in trouble. I mean, you certainly shouldn't be pushing to production anything that you've used a code assistant for without testing it, thoroughly, and actually having it go through like a PR, having a more senior person look at it if you are, a junior developer, an intern, something like that. But I would just say that even if we don't recommend that folks use them, they're going to do it. And so my answer is, it doesn't matter what we think. Junior developers are using them. They just are. In the same way that they use Stack Overflow. So maybe they're just doing ChatGPT. Maybe that would be the advice I'd give, is like, hey, 80% of the time, just try to use ChatGPT or, one of these, chatbots, rather than, using the integrated code assistant as a way of just kind of putting a block on relying on it too much. But I've studied junior developers a fair bit. I was one, and so I would say that there's always something that's going to keep folks from learning in the depth that they need. And so, for instance, when I was coming up, YouTube videos were the thing. I mean, that's how I learned to program, for sure. And I would have up on my laptop screen, the YouTube video on one side and VS Code on the other, and then I would try to pause and copy what I was seeing, but it was so easy to have gone on to any number of GitHub repositories and just download the whole thing, right? And I'm sure a lot of folks did that, right? They'd say, hey, I don't feel like I need to type all these things out manually to learn it. I'm just going to download it. And I'm sure that's still happening. So I think that there's always ways to sort of game the system in order to not learn as well as you can. And of course, I think a lot of folks who are self-taught are always self-flagellating, like, well, I didn't learn the basics like I should have, or I should have got my CS degree, or I should have gone to boot camp. I often say that. I was like, I wish I'd have gone to boot camp. And then I talk to boot camp grads and I get sort of different answers from, depending. Many folks say, you were fine being self-taught. Most of the things I learned was on the job, and it's tough. I think it really just kind of depends on the program, depends on who it is that you talk to, whatever. And I think it really just depends on the situation. But in terms of junior developers using these AI code assistants, Robby, they're already doing it for one, and for two, they're going to have to use them as part of their workflow. I mean, more and more companies are buying subscriptions, so it's just the future.
Do you find that it's been my experience, at least in the last year and a half, give or take, it feels like the industry has not been able to support as many new junior developers though. And so, and do you think that, I don't know if you've seen something different in like the types of clients that your organization works with, or from any research that you've seen, that there will be much of a resurgence of space and need when organizations for junior developers. And I'm not trying to be discouraging to anyone that's hoping to enter the market. It's just, it's when people reach out for advice from me right now, I'm like, well, it's a very different situation right now. And it's kind of gone back and forth a couple times. And I'm like, and the AI makes things seem a little different. And I think there might be, and I do hear from some senior developers that they're like, well, I don't necessarily feel like how people are like, there's just not a space there. So do you think that, going back to my earlier question, do you see that kind of changing much in the near future? Or, I'm not saying you have to predict the future necessarily, but what's your kind of take on that?
What I'm hearing online is that yes, there are fewer junior developer roles, but that again, that's not me with my sort of quantitative analyst hat on. I have not seen numbers suggesting this. What I have seen are tweets and posts online. And so I actually, like I mentioned, I've talked to some folks, some leadership in the boot camp industry, and they have pointed me to their internship programs. And so, for instance, the Aided Developers Academy, part of their program involved having an internship. I mean, it was just part of it. Everyone had to do one. And that's great. You know, they had all these corporate partnerships. Awesome. But then COVID.
Yeah, we do that ourselves. So we relied on a couple of coding schools that would bring us interns at the end of their courses. So we would always have interns every quarter. A couple of those schools went out of business in the
Oh
last
my
year.
God. Interesting. Well, so what I feel like your perspective would be very valuable on this question then too. So what do you, I mean, before I answer, what do you think?
I don't know. I'm just like, I think coding boot camps are not flourishing at the moment because part of their promise, or at least their what they're selling, to potential students is, hey, there's people will hire you, because nobody wants to just get the thing and not be hireable. So if there's not a market necessarily to hire people, or there's a smaller market, there's, you can't, bring as many students through that process and like hope that they're going to land somewhere, because then that's not a sustainable, that's not going to look good on, like, people are like, oh, I guess I'll try some other type of career. So that is my perspective, is just been like, ooh, if the jobs aren't there, the schools aren't going to work.
Anecdotally, that is what I'm hearing as well. Although, again, I talked to the interim CEO at Ada Developers Academy, and she's assured me that it's everything's back to normal with them, even though during COVID they didn't have internships. So I don't know; it might just depend on the program. But yes, I am hearing the same thing that you are, that these jobs are just not around. And I think a lot of people, I don't think, I know, ChatGPT is to blame. Whether or not it's the actual cause or just a perceived cause, I don't know. But I'm hearing that everywhere, that it's more and more organizations are using these code assistants to write the sort of template type of code. Like they sort of easier things that you can knock out pretty quickly, that had previously been the sort of purview of the junior developers, folks on the team who just sort of needed a smaller project to get going. Yeah. So like little hobby projects. I'm thinking of, like, I don't know, just like a little landing page or something. That would be the kind of thing that they could, bang out quickly using, I don't know, either one of the page builder type tools, or that, yeah, you could just use ChatGPT, or, one of the sort of large language model integrated ones that will read it for you easily. And yeah, for free for all intents and purposes, right? That it's, you don't have to pay for someone to, they don't require healthcare, right?
No, that's true. I think there is that part, and I will do agree with that. Maybe with AI, maybe feeling like a bit of disruptor. I also think it just comes down to economics, probably with interest rates and stuff like that. I think if you go back 5 years ago in the industry, we were trying to hire a lot of people, because everybody was hiring, and like we were needing to scale up. And so there's a bit of an interesting competitive thing around organizations wanting to make investments into like, who are their next best senior developers? It's hiring junior developers, right? And what I've kind of seen is it feels like teams are having to be responsible for as much work now with less people. And so with layoffs and everything. So I think it's a weird economical thing within organizations. And I don't understand this thing on a global scale. I think also the pandemic probably this is me kind of waxing poetic a little bit. My own theory is like even like being US based teams is like now less like I think the pandemic probably opened up organizations' eyes that like, hey, we not only do we not need to be on site together, we may not need to actually have our coworkers, the people we do work with, be inside the same country as us. We can hire people in South America, we can hire people in Europe. I'm doing that myself, but not because it's necessarily what I wanted to do, but it's because that's seems like be the only way that I can make this economically work for my organization because our clients are either going to hire us because we're exclusively in the United States or because we have a hybrid of people that are in different countries so we can have a different billing model, different maybe more competitive pricing model to offset. They're like, why would we hire some company that's predominantly in the US versus a team of people that's down in South America that can do just as good a work? Why are you that much better because you're local? That's another interesting thing. So if you're a junior developer coming into the market, you're not only competing with all junior developers in your local area or your country, you're now competing with potentially people that might be willing to make the same amount of money, but have way more experience in a different country. And that's another sort of challenging thing that way outside of like anything that I feel like I can necessarily control on my end. But anyways, it's just, is this some stuff that that RedMonk like does much research into at all, or?
Yeah, it's exact. I have been hearing the exact same thing, and to an extreme, in fact, where engineering leadership is actually sending the director of engineering down to Brazil, say, to create a unit there, or I've talked to some CEOs who are flying over to Poland frequently to meet with their engineering team, there from the US, right? So I absolutely am seeing this, that it's an international group, and that that no longer are and I think it is COVID related to the pandemic that really just sort of changed that mindset. But yeah, it's gone beyond just remote work at this point. It is contractors are taking over this thing, and that's why it was kind of top of mind when I was thinking about how would you create a maintainable code base when you are you have such a far-flung team, right? And that it's going to be rotating, right? Because if you go through a lot of these contracting organizations, they'll get you numbers in the seats, right? They'll take care of how many, but they won't ensure that it's a particular individual, right? So having those sort of relationships and that organizational memory is going to need to be completely overhauled if that is the future, if we're going to be more and more using overseas talent for development in the U.S. And I am absolutely hearing that. I know folks personally, and I'm hearing it in other places as well. And actually, again, that woman from Ada, she said it's less about AI, it's more about the contractors.
Which comes back to documentation. So I think about like in a way, it's like regardless of how your organization's building your software or where people are located, do you have any advice for people that are kind of like navigating how to like smooth things out as like teams are growing or new folks join a project, regardless of where they are? But like, what are some of the biggest mistakes you see companies making with their documentation? We'll start there.
Well, not having it, I guess, is problem number one. You should do it, do the thing. I think deciding on categories is extremely important, and I think it's going to depend on the organization. I'm thinking back to what ours looked like. Like one of the things that we had as a sort of strange category, but really went with the ethos of our team. And again, this is pre-COVID, was listing the developers who had worked on the project. And because it's unlike a lot of other companies, we had our hand in so many projects. It was just so sprawling. And some of them we hadn't touched in years. And then they would reach back out to us and say, hey, can you work on this again? And so maybe we didn't have a sort of retainer with them, but they would, still call us up when they wanted to change something. So because of that situation, it was important and it behooved us to sort of cut out the step of going through and looking at all the commits, because maybe they had commits from their own internal developers that would be pages long, So we wanted to know at our organization who had touched this code base, because then we could ask them questions about, again, where the dragons are and, what maybe is important, or even things about like the client itself, like, hey, are they, what sort of, details are we going to need to know to work with these folks? And so I think that was a sort of strange category, but for us, it made perfect sense. But then the other ones would be just like how to get it up and running, right? And then, obviously having some idea about like, what the CMS is. And so, yeah, I mean, a lot of it had to do with sort of the structural questions of like, how does it work in the organization? But then also just like brass tacks, what sort of project are we actually looking here? And then, that helps with assigning it as well, because maybe some folks are a little bit more comfortable with Python than others, right? So that was the sort of, I know that those were always important, but I'd say one of the other important things was just making sure that we would go back in and add to these projects, because there were, again, so many. And even if we set aside 3 days straight for creating documentation, it still wouldn't be enough. And trying to keep it up to date, and all the passwords that we would need, right? Making sure that we've got all of that stuff in one place, behind a password manager, and keeping everything secure, and making sure that we're following best practices for all these things that the client should take for granted, we would hope, but also that it's going to help us as a team to distribute the work and to make sure that we don't have more pain than we would otherwise. Yeah, and I think one of the philosophical questions again that we had, and this was fun, it was with a back-end engineer who said all of the things in documentation should just be inline comments in the code. And I felt very strongly that that was not true. He said, no, you put anything about like getting it up and running in the README, and everything else should just be inline comments. But that kind of left out, some of these other questions of like, who's worked on it in the past, and what are some of these other like weird things about the project that we would need to know that just they get lost if they're in code comments. So I was very much on the side of like keeping them in an external place, and I think these are conversations that are I suspect are happening everywhere, based on the popularity of Backstage. So Spotify's the platform engineering movement, usually it begins with documentation, right? That's the first thing that they always advertise, like, here, put all your documentation in one place. And and those can be actually a lot nicer in terms of discoverability than a wiki, or something that is a little hard to navigate to. I mean, every vendor, especially for dev tools, is aspirationally talking about the single pane of glass approach. And I think that is the promise of platform engineering today. But back, when I was working on these projects, we were, we kept things a little more simple, with, password protectors and things, and just trying to make sure that we had our own heads around things. And then, yeah, just making sure that we look at it every 6 months and like make sure that it hasn't become deprecated. Because, I think the other problem with these, you use an email, for like a third party service, they've only got one email address on file that they're going to email about like, hey, some issue, right? You need to reset your password, or, hey, we've had some sort of big issue, or you need to, reset your Dynamo or something. All of these things can get lost in the shuffle if they're just going to one engineer who maybe just, looks at it and forgets about it, right? Those are the sort of things that you want to make sure that they're, making their way back to that, or that the password is updated where everyone can find it and things like that.
Hey folks, it's Robby here. I want to take a moment to tell you about my own company, Planet Argon. We're a software consultancy dedicated to helping organizations breathe new life into their legacy applications. Whether you need staff augmentation or fractional development services, we're here to support projects that don't quite require a full-time team. We specialize in a variety of technologies, including Ruby on Rails, React, and Laravel, just to name a few. So if you know of a company that's wrestling with technical debt, legacy code, or needs help navigating new features, send them our way. We're ready to help them modernize and optimize their software. Check us out at planetargon.com. That's planetargon.com. Now, back to the show. It's important for teams to have those sorts of team agreements on like how you're going to do that stuff, and probably need some documentation around that as well. Do you see a role for AI in helping to improve or even automate some of this type of documentation in the future?
Oh, yes. I want that. That is what I think AI can do well. Yeah. And I think there's been a few approaches for that. I don't know that I could list them off right now, but yeah, having a solution to, keys, like those are the sort of things that are so important, and that, yeah, are just so easy to have, have a machine notice if it changes, right? Absolutely. I think that that is the future that I want, is documentation to be written with AI. Because it doesn't have to be cute. It does have to be accurate, and it can, point to where things are in the code in a more interactive way. Like the wiki approach didn't do that. That was separate, right? That is like in its own document. It's not it doesn't, you can make a hyperlink and that's about it, right? But a lot of these things that are more integrated into your code base, either through like, GitHub or something, those can actually take you to the place in the code where the dragons are, or where you need to be to begin with, or whatever. And I mean, in the future, maybe they can even be queryable in a way that is credible, right? That you can actually believe it. So yeah, I absolutely think that that's what's going to be happening in the future. I mean, the other one that I hear about is having AI write tests. And I always think this one's a little tough for me, because as much as everybody hates writing tests, right? Everybody being developers, the stereotypical developer, I'm sure there's some that love it. What I am skeptical of is having AI at every tier of the software development lifecycle. To me, it seems like maybe there need to be some separation there, maybe I'm just being too reactionary. I don't know, but I feel like right now, at least, having AI plan it, having AI code it, having AI test it, having AI deploy it, I don't know about that. I'm not comfortable with that yet. I feel like that's not the future that, or that's not the present, at least. And so maybe we'll get there, but folks like Adam Seligman at AWS, he and I debate that issue. So, hey, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the future does hold, cutting out the humans, or at least having AI integrated at all parts. And I think what we're going to see more and more is that the silent AI, like there is an AI component to some of the dev tools and you don't even necessarily know about it, right? You're using it and it's going to be integrated in some capacity. And, it might not be, shouted loudly, that you're not necessarily going to know that it's integrated sort of fundamental way that's making decisions in your app. And, if it's tested well, maybe that won't matter. But I think that there's going to be some trial and error there. And I think, let me take a step back here. I think what is extremely important, and becoming more so, is the ability to read code. As AI writes more and more of the code, reading it is going to be the skill that all developers are going to need. They're going to have to understand it and sort of figure out how it's going to, the trickle down of those decisions, right? How is this going to affect other parts of the code base? How is this going to affect the other parts of the project, right? Like, is this going to seem like a small change, but in fact have ripple effects that, we can't, even compass, with our sort of limited view. And that, I think, is the problem. Like with junior developers, to go back to that, junior developers are not experts at reading code. And that's what they really need to be working on. So fine, use ChatGPT to pump out some code that you can add to your code base. It seems to work fine, but you need to be able to read it and understand every part of it in order to make sure that you not only are progressing with your own skills, but also that you're not going to break the app, right? That you're not pushing something to prod that's going to, create massive problems.
That's interesting thinking about. I mean, we already spend, I forget the percentages of our time as coders. It's more than 50% of our time, I think, where most developers spend reading code versus writing and changing code, which is why we use code in the first place. Everything's not in just binary, right? We have all these levels of abstraction. So I do sometimes wonder if, like, in a few years, like, the code won't matter as much because it'll just be constantly rebuilding itself somehow behind the scenes. Like, if you just constantly redefining your specifications for your software project, and then rebuild is a rewrite, just pushing a button and then just regenerates the whole thing with whatever I'm air quoting, best practices are at that current era. And would it even matter what language you're working with anymore behind the scenes if you're not having to do that? I don't know. I don't know if that's a world that necessarily makes super excited about, but I don't know what's going to happen. I'm just glad I didn't end up having to get a job as a DBA once upon a time. So TBD. So we'll come back and revisit this conversation, Kate, in 5 years and say, hey, what have we learned? Is talking out of our asses? Who knows? A couple of quick last questions for you, Kate. Is there a non-software, non-technical book that you find yourself recommending to peers?
I don't know that I have recommended this to developers, but I guess it's top of mind for me for a number of reasons that I find sort of formative to the work that I do. And that would be Darwin's The Origin of Species. So when I did my PhD work, I just was really struck with the ways that his methodology and the ways that he thinks through problems. And I find it so compelling. And I also find his writing to be extremely readable. So I don't know that I would recommend that anybody read it maybe cover to cover, but I would take a look at maybe the first few pages of The Origin of Species. And so again, this is the Victorianist in me talking. I don't know that folks need to follow me down that particular rabbit hole. I find a lot of the modern world to be built on ways of thinking that are still extremely Victorian. And I mean that not in the like doilies and the monarchy sort of way, but more in like the scientific way. Like a lot of scientific discoveries that happened there at that time are still resonating today. And so I am finally publishing my dissertation, actually, it should be coming out next year. And it talks about Darwin's use of the term speculation. And I find that to be extremely compelling because we usually think of natural selection as being a theory, and it absolutely is. And of course, people debate that, right? You can't demonstrate a theory, but you can't prove one. And so the sort of idea of like the spectrum of demonstrability and the methods that you employ in order to demonstrate something, I think is, it was prescient at the time, and I think it extends into today. But what I love about speculation and thinking about that, which is the term that Darwin uses on the first page of The Origin of Species, is that it suggests the importance of imagination to his reasoning. So even though he came up with one of the most important scientific theories that ended up, we can now prove it using, bacteria, and we had the ability to, even though we can't watch species change over time, we don't live long enough, right? With the better observation capabilities that we have now, we can, anyone who gets a different flu vaccine every year is proving evolution, right? Because we know that these bacteria are evolving and we can see it happening, right? But I love the idea of imagination being involved in scientific reasoning. So, to make a long explanation short, I would just sum up by saying, yeah, take a look at The Origin of Species. Not only is it sort of beautifully written in parts, but also, the way that he talks about scientific knowledge is really compelling for me. And I think that there's some extensible lessons there.
Definitely include links to that in the show notes for everybody. And where can listeners best follow your thoughts and ruminations on software development and things that your organization's exploring and researching?
Well, I have a blog on the RedMonk website, so I would definitely say take a look at that. And in terms of social media, you can find me on LinkedIn and on Twitter.
Excellent. Well, it's been such a delight having you join us on Maintainable, Kate. Thank you so much for stopping by to talk shop with us.
Thank you.